Right. Speaking of infinity, as we were.
Were we?
We were.
What time?
Lives, death,
Yeah.
and so on. Right. There's an aspect of infinity. Right.
Yeah.
So this is a piece of writing called Approaches to Infinity.
Same picture Escher did.
Hmm?
The Infinity Steps.
Yeah. This is by him. He wrote this.
Coincidence?
Approaches to Infinity. Man is incapable of imagining that time could ever stop. For us, even if the Earth should cease turning on its axis and revolving around the sun, even if there were no longer days and nights, summers and winters, time would continue to flow on eternally. It is no easier for us to imagine that somewhere past the farthest stars in the nocturnal heavens there is an end to space, a borderline beyond which nothing exists. It's impossible. The concept empty does have some meaning for us, because we can at least visualize a space that is empty, but nothing, in the sense of spaceless, is beyond our capacity to imagine. This is why, since the time when man came to lie, sit, and stand on this earth of ours, to creep and walk on it, to sail, ride, and fly over it, and now fly away from it, with space travel, we have clung to illusions, to a hereafter, a purgatory, a heaven and a hell, a rebirth or a nirvana, all existing eternally in time and endlessly in space. Has a composer, an artist for whom time is the basis on which he elaborates, ever felt the wish to approach eternity by means of sounds? I do not know, but if he has, I imagine that he found the means at his disposal inadequate to satisfy that wish. How could a composer succeed in evoking the suggestion of something that does not come to an end? Music is not there before it begins or after it ends. It is present only while our ears receive the sound vibrations of which it consists. A stream of pleasant sounds that continues uninterrupted through an entire day does not produce a suggestion of eternity, but rather fatigue and irritation. Not even the most obsessive radio listener would ever receive any notion of eternity by leaving his set on from early morning to late in the night, even if he selected only lofty classical programs. No, this problem of eternity is even more difficult to solve with dynamics than with statics, where the aim is to penetrate, by means of static, visually observable images on the surface of a simple piece of drawing paper, to the deepest endlessness. It seems doubtful that there are many contemporary draftsmen, graphic artists, painters, and sculptors in whom such a wish arises. In our time, they are driven more by impulses that they cannot and do not wish to define, by an urge which cannot be described intellectually in words, but can only be felt unconsciously or subconsciously. Nevertheless, it can apparently happen that someone, without much exact learning and with little of the information collected by earlier generations in his head, that such an individual, passing his days like other artists in the creation of more or less fantastic pictures, can one day feel ripen in himself a conscious wish to use his imaginary images to approach infinity as purely and as closely as possible. Deep, deep infinity. Quietness. To dream away from the tensions of daily living. To sail over a calm sea at the prow of a ship, toward a horizon that always recedes. To stare at the passing waves and listen to their monotonous soft murmur.
Gosh.
To dream away into unconsciousness.
Oh, me. Not literally.
Anyone who plunges into infinity, in both time and space, further and further without stopping, needs fixed points, mileposts.
Tangible realities.
See, exactly. For otherwise his movement is indistinguishable from standing still, because there's nothing to compare against.
Exactly, you're floating around like a crisp packet.
Exactly. There must be stars past which he shoots, beacons from which he can measure the distance he has traversed. He must divide his universe into distances of a given length, into compartments recurring in an endless series. Each time he passes a borderline between one compartment and the next, his clock ticks each time. Anyone who wishes to create a universe on a two-dimensional surface, he deludes himself because our three-dimensional world does not permit a reality of two, nor of our dimensions. Anyone who wishes to create a universe on a two-dimensional surface notices that time passes while he is working on his creation. But when he has finished and looks at what he has done, he sees something that is static and timeless. In his picture, no clock ticks, and there is only a flat, unmoving surface. No one
That's
can.
what that is.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Carry on.
No one can draw a line that is not a boundary line. Every line
Matisse.
splits. Exactly. No one can draw a line that is not a boundary line, even if he wants to. Every line splits a singularity into a plurality. It divides. It creates a plurality. Every closed contour, no matter what its shape, whether a perfect circle or an irregular random form, evokes in addition the notions of inside and outside, and the suggestion of near and far away, of object and background, bifurcation, contrast, division,
Fucking hell, David. That's
plurality.
just amazing.
The dynamic, regular ticking of the clock each time we pass a boundary line.
Bam, 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 bam.
Each time we pass a boundary line on our journey through space is no longer heard, but we can replace it in our static medium by the periodic repetition of similarly shaped figures on our paper surface, closed forms which border on each other. Determine each other's shape and fill the surface in every direction as far as we wish. What kind of figures? Irregular, shapeless spots incapable of evoking associative ideas in
Objectional
us.
patterns.
Or abstract geometrical linear figures, rectangles or hexagons, at most suggesting a chessboard or honeycomb.
Oh, honeycomb! I said that before.
Repetition
for
repetitive
effect.
pattern.
Bam, bam, bam. Also, didactism. Repetition for effect. Fuck me, then push. Oh my god, did I write this?
Repetitive patterns.
Repetitive patterns, but then you have to look for the anomaly, which is the objectional pattern, which is the pattern within the pattern that forms the pattern.
Chaos and order.
Yeah, chaos, calm chaos. It wouldn't be me, mate.
Abstract geometrical linear figures, rectangles or hexagons, at most suggesting a chessboard or a honeycomb. Now, no.
Or pool table. Anyway.
No. We are not blind, deaf and dumb. We consciously regard the forms surrounding us and, in their great variety, speaking to us in a distinct and exciting language.
That's what I just did.
Consequently,
oh god.
The forms with which we compose the divisions of our surface must be recognisable as signs, as distinct symbols. Forms with which we compose the divisions of our surface must be recognisable as signs, as distinct symbols of the living or dead matter around us.
Oh, where's my fucking sign on? I've lost it. That's not a good sign.
If we, exactly right, yeah. Crosses and circles. Circles
and there's
with
no
dots
borders.
in them, and there's no borders. Consequently, the forms which... If we create a universe, let it not be abstract or vague, but rather let it concretely represent recognisable things.
Exactly. Humbly leave something people will find out. You don't have to show them. You just don't have to tell them, but you have to leave these. Be indiscreet, but be good.
Let us construct a two-dimensional universe
New complexity.
out of an infinitely large number of identical but distinctly recognisable components.
Multiple personalities.
It could be a universe of stones, stars, plants, animals or people.
Who throws stones at the stars?
What has been achieved with the orderly division of the surface in Study of Regular Division of the Plane with Reptiles, number 2, one of Escher's pictures? What has been achieved in this picture with the orderly division of the surface? Not yet true infinity, but nevertheless a fragment of it, a piece of the universe of the reptiles.
So, go on.
If the surface on which they fit together were infinitely large, an infinitely large number of them could have been represented.
Can I just put in the video? This is an interesting. I'm just going to pick a point now, if you don't mind me. It's a good discussion point. How do we decide where the structure is of the surface? Okay, so once we decide on a way of living, an ethos, whatever, who gets to decide the right and wrong? Where does that come from?
Comes from yourself.
Exactly, and in your own utopia.
Generated from within the core of yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So we're not here to put hold on people. If you live a good and humble but productive and worthwhile life, and you always leave on a positive, then that's where your structure will come from. That's how you uplift the structure. That's your yin and your yang. Live a good life. And that's how you decide the structure. So otherwise, you could. That's why laws were invented. Or you can't kill people. You can't shag dogs. Maybe you shouldn't make love to someone for a fried egg. That's not a law. But maybe you should be. But then that's someone imposing something, because we don't want to be abominable. So you have to have a level of normal within society, but don't impose tyranny on those extremes, those bipolar extremes. But live a good life, be creative.
In harmony with others.
Yeah, in harmony with yourself. and then that
With
will
yourself and with others.
that will manifest into the rest of the world. Although manifest does sound like masturbation. Once I was having a wank and my mum caught me.
Well, there you go.
Not funny.
But this is not a matter of an intellectual game. We are aware that we live in a material, three-dimensional reality, and we are unable in any way to fabricate a flat surface extending infinitely on all sides. What we can do is to bend the piece of paper on which this reptilian world is represented fragmentarily and make a paper cylinder of it, so that the animal figures on that cylindrical surface continue without interruption to interlock while the tube revolves around its longitudinal axis.
That's attentional. That's the attentional world we live in. Sorry.
In this way, endlessness is achieved in one direction, but not yet in all directions, because we are no more able to make an infinitely long cylinder than an infinitely extending flat surface. Sphere with Fish, number 97, which is a sculpture, an actual wooden sphere, gives a more satisfactory solution. A wooden ball whose surface is completely filled by 12 congruent fish figures. If one turns the ball in one's hands, one sees fish after fish appear into infinity. But is this spherical result really completely satisfying? Certainly not for a graphic artist, who is more bound to the flat surface than is a draftsman, painter or sculptor. And even apart from this, 12 identical fish are not the same as infinitely many. However, there are also other ways to represent an infinite number without bending the flat surface.
Right.
Smaller and smaller, 1, number 6, is a first attempt in this direction. The figures with which this wood engraving is constructed reduce their surface area by half constantly and radially from the edges to the centre.
Fibonacci effect should do. Sorry. I'll stop speaking.
No, continue. This is important.
Well, go on.
Where the limit of the infinitely many and infinitely small is reached in a single point. But this configuration too remains a fragment, because it can be expanded as far as one wishes by adding increasingly larger figures.
Unended.
The only way to escape this fragmentary character and to set an infinity in its entirety within a logical boundary line is to use the reverse of the approach in smaller and smaller 1.
Bang!
The first, still awkward application of this method is shown by circle limit 1, number 163. The largest animal figures are now located in the centre, and the limit of the infinitely many and infinitely small is reached at the circular edge. The skeleton of this configuration, apart from the 3 straight lines passing through the centre, consists solely of arcs with increasingly shorter radii, that's radiuses, the closer they approach the limiting edge. In addition, they all intersect it at right angles. The woodcut, circle limit 1, being first, shows many deficiencies. Both the shape of the fish, still hardly developed from linear abstractions to rudimentary animals, and their arrangement and attitude with respect to each other leave much to be desired. Accentuated by their backbones, which pass into each other longitudinally, series of fish can be recognised in alternating pairs, white ones with heads facing each other and black ones whose tails touch. Thus, there is no continuity, no one-way direction, no unity of colour in each row.
There's an ending.
In the coloured woodcut, circle limit 3, number 7, most of these defects have been eliminated. There are now only series moving in one direction. All the fish of the same series have the same colour and swim after each other, head to tail, along a circular course from edge to edge.
Not tail to head.
The more closely they approach the centre, the larger they become. 4 colours were required in order that each total series should contrast with its surroundings. No single component of all the series, which from infinitely far away rise like rockets perpendicularly from the limit and are at last lost in it, ever reaches the boundary line. No single component of all the series ever reaches the boundary line.
You never know because you're over. Up there.
Outside it, however.
Sorry. I'll carry on with it.
Outside it, however, is the absolute nothing.
Yes.
But the spherical world cannot exist without this emptiness around it.
Exactly.
The spherical world cannot exist
It can't.
without this
Because
emptiness
you wouldn't
around
have a
it.
reason to.
Not only because inside presumes outside,
Mercury.
but also because in the nothing lie the strict, geometrically determined, immaterial middle points of the arcs of which the skeleton is constructed. Right? There is something in such laws that takes the breath away. They are not discoveries or inventions of the human mind, but exist independently of us. In a moment of clarity, one can at most discover that they are there and take them into account. That's all we can do. Discover that they are there and take them into account. Long before there were people on Earth. Long before there were people on Earth, crystals were already growing in the Earth's crust.
In a certain way.
Exactly. On one day or another, a human being first came across such a sparkling morsel of regularity lying on the ground, or hit one with his stone tool and broke it off and fell at his feet. And it broke off and fell at his feet. And he picked it up and regarded it in his open hand, and he was amazed.
Because he found some faith and hope.